you work your way through your own consciousness and begin to unravel your thought self, the less you'll try to adjust your life. You know, the less you'll try to control your life. Bear with me on this one. There's going to take quite a bit of collaboration on it to be really clear. So the more you unravel yourself, and you begin to, because as you do that, you start to understand life more when you start to understand yourself more, right? Because you are life. You are a microcosm of all life, which is pretty cool. The universe is expressing itself in an infinite different forms. You're one of those forms, and that's just a miracle. It's an amazing thing that you are exactly the way that you are. But anyway, that's kind of like a whole other thing. But as you unravel and as you learn and as you discover reality, your own inner reality, you start to kind of figure out what's been driving you most of your life, and you start to realize that most of the stuff that's been driving you your whole life isn't necessarily the best stuff to drive your life. For examples, like social conditioning, and we're raised not only by our parents, but we're raised by all our teachers in school, and we're raised by our friends and our friends' parents, and our experiences and all that kind of stuff. All that stuff collects to create functions and cycles in your brain, in your mind, and thought patterns and all that kind of stuff. So it's all that stuff that kind of governs your life, or starts to govern your life at some point. And as you start to unpack that stuff, unravel, and you get the opportunity to choose to keep some stuff, and you get the opportunity to discard some stuff, which is a wonderful place to be. At least you have some choices, and how you experience how your inner world operates, So when you start doing this, one thing that tends to happen, or has happened to me anyway, is you begin to release a little bit. And especially in a spiritual sense, if you start connecting with something divine, or the idea of divinity, meaning divine is a beautiful word to describe something that's really difficult to describe. I'm just going to see if I can come up with some synonyms. Subtlety, the subtle force of life, you could say, or consciousness itself is divine, is divinity. That's probably good for now. I think the subtle life force, you can say, is a good way. Spirit goes deeper than that too. But pure consciousness is a beautiful one. My teacher Muji uses the word isness a lot. The simple isness of everything. There is a quality of everything simply exists. There's just an existence. Fundamentally, there's nothing else with it or to it. It just is. That's a good way to put it too. But if you do this kind of work with that kind of connection, or if you're seeking that while doing the unraveling of yourself, I feel like if you do the unraveling, even if you're not engaged with any kind of spiritual concepts or anything like that, I feel like inevitably you you will begin to feel that presence, because that's what's left. You know, as you start to unravel, you leave space, and you realize that there's something there. Like if you go through like a practice of just like neti, like just disidentifying, I don't know if that's a word, but just unidentifying with all the layers of observable qualities of experience. For example, your body, and then your brain and your organs and your senses and the perceptions of those senses, the objects of those senses, meaning, you know, the world out there. And as you go through and you just negate identifying with everything, the body, the mind, the senses, all of your thoughts, everything that's witnessable, everything that can be witnessed, you disregard as yourself. And like, this is really like one of the only ways that I found anyway to actually be introduced to your actual self, to actually begin to see from your actual self, because your true self is infinite, and its perception is all encompassing. Its vantage point can be within the mind. It can have a vantage point inside of the mind, and almost as the mind, so it can like kind of pop up anywhere. That's I think that ability, I think, is what causes that to happen, causes that seeming like movement, or that seeming distraction, sort of, that kind of bubbles into mind space and then starts to see from the mind. It moves into that field and like puts on like these goggles and starts perceiving everything through those goggles, and it's a distortion of reality. So as you do this practice of negating all of that stuff, inevitably you'll realize that you still exist. That's the kind of the point of it, is when you let go of everything that's perceivable or witnessable as yourself, because we commonly identify with all that stuff. As you practice this and stop doing that, even if it's just for a moment, you realize that you still exist. You're still there. You didn't disappear because you stopped identifying with your mind and your body, which is amazing. Now, so that being said, inevitably, I feel there will be a spiritual presence that you'll have, or a spiritual experience that you have, because you are a spirit, no matter what your focus or intention is. But as you start doing this, you start to realize that all the other stuff that we were false identifying with, all those other functions, were ultimately what we're governing our actions, our decisions, and our life experiences ultimately, because they're co-creating life by projecting energy out into the field of material reality. And what starts to happen is you start to give the controls to that truer self, that true self, that subtle life force consciousness. And that presence doesn't look to control things. It harmonizes with life and moves with life, as opposed to trying to change life or shift life into something that's suitable for the senses, or pleasurable for the senses, or pleasurable for the mind, or convenient for the mind, or comfortable for the body, right? All of that stuff. That stuff doesn't really register with the spirit self, because as living as the spirit self and tuned in with life in a way that's in harmony and connected with it, the experiences that you have in life, no matter what, are perfect
and they're beautiful because if they're unpleasant to the senses, there's a reason for that. If you find yourself in an unpleasant situation, this is where we get into karma, that's what it feels like to release something that's binding you. Those experiences. And even pleasurable experiences can be that too. It's a little bit different, but because you wouldn't really necessarily, you're not going to really seek to do the work in those places. I encourage that. I think that's a fierce beauty to do that kind of work of transcending and releasing pleasurable experiences, because most of the time we want to dive into that stuff really and absorb into it and like rely on that for our happiness. But if you can enjoy those pleasurable moments, those beautiful moments that feel good in your body, feel good to your senses and all that, but simultaneously exist in a transcendent state of them and not a reliant state on them, and where your true enjoyment, your true happiness exists in just being your true self. If you can experience life in that way, then you're always in a peaceful and joyful.
In 10 miles, take exit 19 onto Woodhaven Boulevard.
Now you know where I'm going. If you do this, then either end of like the spectrum of like experiencing, as far as like pleasurable and unpleasurable on that swing, either one, when you're on it, it's an enjoyable experience because there's a new meaning to what happens in your life, because you know where it comes from, you know why it exists, and then you are simply don't rely on anything outside of yourself for your enjoyment or your pleasure. It's a pleasurable experience to be consistently rooted in your true awareness, in your true consciousness, in your true being. There's nothing more beautiful than that, because it never moves. It's unwavering. The only thing that's consistent in your reality is you, right? Everything else changes and moves. So that's a good way to really harness in yourself there, is anything that changes, anything that moves, anything that's perceivable, and anything that comes and goes is not you. You are the consistent force in your life. And it just so happens that if you look at, just the nature of that being, like I said before, its present isn't trying to control or change anything, right? Now, what does it mean to love somebody? It doesn't mean that you try to control them or you try to change them. If you're like in love with someone, right? You accept them for who they are, as they are, no matter what, right? And you flow with them. You walk with them. You're not trying to, shift them into something that you want. That's often what happens in relationships, but I didn't think I was going to get into relationship stuff right now, but I am. But that's often what happens in relationships is you either enter into it, or at some point you start to realize the stuff that your mind finds annoying, and you try to change the person that you're with and adjust them to something that's more enjoyable for your mind. But existing as the true self, the pure self, is accepting of everything that happens in life, and ultimately will lead you to be able to have more loving relationships with people too. That's just a bonus in this chat here. But it's nature. That's why it said that its nature is love. That's why, there's all this talk of like God is love and all that kind of stuff, and it's wonderful to hear and everything, but this is why, is because when you look at the qualities of the pure consciousness, of your pure self, of God, the qualities are completely synonymous with true unconditional love, undeniably. And it's fundamental, and it's even like very grounded. It's nothing really all that mystical, which is really wonderful too. So let's see if we can conjure up kind of like a generalized point here with this, so we can create some efficiency with it. Where did we begin? Hang on. as you do the work of self-inquiry, of unraveling your conditioned your conditioned mind, and you start to unidentify or disidentify, whichever, I don't know which word works, but as you start to do that and root yourself in your true awareness and remove the habit to identify with the stuff that moves, with the perceivable world, right? Root yourself in your true awareness, which is silence, the silence inside yourself, right? There's no mental activity inside your true being. Your true being is pure consciousness and it's pure love. As you do this, you start to move yourself out of naturally, this is how it went for me anyway, of trying to control your life so much. You know, you engage with life, but you do a lot more listening, right? That's what ends up shifting, is instead of like projecting out and manifesting your life consciously with your mind and your desires, which who knows where they're coming from, who knows who's creating those desires, and you start to listen to life, and life starts to speak to you of what you should do with your life, of what you should do with your actions. It helps you make decisions, and it comes from silence. So when you get quiet, you harmonize with life. Life tunes you to the frequency that it needs from you, or that it wants from you, or that is aligned with your being, your individual presence, right? Because your mind isn't interested in alignment. It's just interested in like doing stuff. It's like kind of like chaotic. It's all over the place. But your true spirit, your true self, is aligned with everything because it's the source of everything, right? It's the same source that created everything in the universe is inside of you.
Save 2 minutes via Graham Avenue.